Working the night shift changes the way you see the world. The streets get quieter, buildings feel emptier, and time seems to move differently when most people are asleep. It's supposed to be peaceful, just you, your job, and the slow ticking of the clock until morning. But that silence can be deceptive, because when you work at night, you start noticing things you normally wouldn't. Small sounds, flickering lights, movements that don't quite make sense. And when there's no one else around to confirm what you're seeing, doubt sets in. The people in these stories were just doing their jobs, stocking shelves, watching camera feeds, answering phones, waiting for their shifts to end. None of them expected anything unusual to happen, but during the quietest hours of the night, something did. In this video, you'll hear 4 disturbing true night shift horror stories from people who experienced moments they still can't fully explain. Encounters that happened when help was far away, buildings were empty, and the only witness was the person telling the story. These aren't stories about monsters jumping out of the dark. They're about the feeling that something is wrong, and realizing you might be the only one awake to notice it. I worked at a small convenience store just off a quiet road, the kind of place that stayed open late mostly out of habit. By that hour, the parking lot was empty, the shelves were stocked, and the only sound in the store was the hum of the refrigerators. I checked the clock behind the counter. 3:42 a.m. I remember thinking how slow the night had been. No customers for nearly an hour. No cars passing by. Just me and the silence. That's when the bell over the door rang. I looked up automatically and saw a man step inside. He didn't say anything, just walked in slowly, hands in his jacket pockets, head slightly down. I greeted him out of habit, but he didn't respond. He headed straight toward the back aisles. That wasn't unusual. Late-night customers were often quiet. Still, something about him felt off. I couldn't explain it at the time, but the longer he was out of sight, the more aware I became of how quiet the store felt. No footsteps, no rustling shelves, nothing. A few minutes passed. I glanced toward the aisles again, expecting to see him come back up with something in his hands. He didn't. I checked the clock. 3:47 a.m. That's when it hit me. I hadn't heard the door open again, and I hadn't heard him leave. I leaned forward over the counter and listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No sounds from the aisles. Not even the faint shuffle of someone browsing. That was strange. The store wasn't big. You could hear someone moving even if they were trying to be quiet. The floor tiles creaked slightly when you walked on them. The shelves rattled if anything was touched. But there was nothing. I stepped out from behind the counter and slowly walked toward the first aisle, telling myself the guy was probably crouched down looking at something on the bottom shelf. Late-night customers did weird things sometimes. As I turned the corner, the aisle was empty. No man, no movement, nothing out of place. I checked the next aisle, then the next. Still empty. My heart started to beat faster as I reached the back of the store. The storage room door was closed, just like it always was. I knew I hadn't unlocked it that night. Customers weren't allowed back there. I stood there for a moment trying to rationalize what was happening. Maybe he'd gone into the bathroom. I walked toward the restroom door near the back. It was closed. I knocked lightly. No response. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I reached for the handle and tried the door. It was locked from the outside, just like it was supposed to be at night. No one could have gone in there without my key. That's when I felt it. That sinking feeling in my stomach that told me something wasn't right. I walked back toward the front of the store and checked the door. It was still locked. The metal latch was firmly in place, exactly how I'd left it after the customer walked in. There was no way anyone could have left without me hearing the bell. I looked up at the security monitor behind the counter. The camera showed the aisles from above. Every aisle was empty. I rewound the footage to the moment the bell rang. I watched the man walk in on the screen. I watched him head toward the back. And then, nothing. On the footage, he never came back into view. He didn't leave the store. He didn't enter another aisle. It was like he just stopped existing the moment he walked past the camera's blind spot. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. I checked the time. 3:53 a.m. I was suddenly very aware of how alone I was, and how quiet the store had become. I stood behind the counter, staring at the security monitor, replaying the footage again and again. The man entered. He walked toward the back, and then nothing. No exit, no return to the aisles, no sign he'd ever been there. I felt my mouth go dry. I rewound it slower this time, watching carefully for anything I might have missed. The camera angle wasn't perfect. There was a small blind spot near the storage door, but even so, there was nowhere he could have gone without reappearing on screen. Unless he was still there. The thought made my chest tighten. I turned away from the monitor and looked down the aisles again. The store lights buzzed softly overhead, illuminating shelves that suddenly felt too tall, too close together. Every shadow between them looked deeper than it should have. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I expected. No response. I grabbed the phone under the counter and hovered my finger over the call button. I didn't want to call my manager. Not yet. I didn't even know what I'd say. A guy walked in and vanished. Didn't sound real, even to me. That's when I heard footsteps. They came from the back of the store. Slow, measured, unhurried. My heart started pounding as I stepped out from behind the counter, straining to see between the aisles. The footsteps stopped the moment I moved. I stood there, frozen, listening. Nothing. Then the freezer door creaked open. The sound was unmistakable. The heavy glass door near the drink section, opening just enough to let cold air spill out. I could hear the faint hum of the compressor change as the door shifted. I hadn't heard anyone walk past me. I took a shaky step toward the sound, my eyes locked on the freezer aisle. The door was open now, just slightly, fog curling out into the aisle. I stopped a few feet away. Inside the glass, reflected back at me, was the empty store behind me, and right over my shoulder, something moved. Not a full shape, not a face, just the suggestion that someone was standing too close. I spun around. The store was empty. The freezer door slammed shut behind me. I don't remember jumping, but suddenly I was standing halfway down the aisle, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The freezer door was closed again, just like it had been before. No fog, no movement. The store looked normal, too normal. I checked the lock on the front door again, even though I already knew it was secure. Then I went back to the monitor and watched the footage one last time. The man entered. He never left. At 4 a.m., my shift finally ended. I didn't wait for the relief worker to show up. I locked the store, left a note for my manager, and got in my car with shaking hands. I didn't look back at the building. The next day, my manager called me into the office. He asked why I'd left early and why I'd written something strange on the note. I asked him what he meant. He showed me. I had written, "He's still here." I don't remember writing that. The security footage was checked again later that day. This time, the man never appeared at all. No entry, no customer, no blind spot, just an empty store, and me reacting to something that wasn't on camera. I quit that job a week later, but sometimes, when I stop by that store late at night, I notice the lights are still on, even when the sign says closed, and I wonder if the last customer ever really left. Working nights as a security guard mostly meant boredom. I sat alone in a small office at the back of the building, watching camera feeds flicker across a row of monitors. Most nights were identical. Empty hallways, locked doors, lights turning on and off automatically. I liked the routine. It made the hours predictable. That night, though, something felt off from the start. The building was quieter than usual. No random noises, no flickering lights, just stillness. I checked the time on the monitor, 2:18 a.m. I leaned back in my chair and scanned the screens out of habit. Lobby, parking garage, stairwells, hallways. Everything looked normal. Then I noticed movement. It wasn't obvious, just a slight shift on one of the hallway cameras, like a shadow changing shape. I leaned forward, squinting at the screen. The hallway was empty. I rewound the footage a few seconds and watched again. Nothing. I told myself it was just the camera adjusting to the lighting. That happened sometimes. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. I continued watching. A minute later, the same camera flickered again. This time, I was sure of it. At the very end of the hallway, just before the camera cut off, something moved out of frame. Not fast, not running, walking. I checked the access logs immediately. No doors had been opened on that floor. No alarms, no alerts, which meant one thing. Whatever I saw on that camera was already inside. I stayed focused on that hallway camera longer than I should have. Nothing moved. No shadows shifted. The screen showed the same empty stretch of carpet and closed doors it always did. I told myself I'd imagined the movement, that my eyes were tired from staring at monitors for hours. Still, I couldn't look away. I checked the time again, 2:23 a.m. I pulled up the camera controls and manually adjusted the brightness and contrast, watching for glitches. Everything looked clean, no interference, no lag. The feed was live. I switched to another camera on the same floor. Empty. Then another. Empty. Whatever I'd seen hadn't triggered any sensors. No doors opened. No motion alerts. That bothered me more than if something obvious had happened. The system was designed to catch even small movements, unless the movement wasn't triggering it. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes, when the hallway feed flickered again. This time, I didn't miss it. At the far end of the hallway, just at the edge of the frame, a shape passed slowly from right to left. It didn't blur, it didn't rush, it walked. I froze, staring at the screen, my hand hovering over the mouse. The shape was gone almost immediately, leaving the hallway empty again. I rewound the footage. 10 seconds back, then 20. I watched carefully. Nothing appeared. No shape, no shadow. Just an empty hallway the entire time. My stomach tightened. I checked the timestamp overlay to make sure the feed hadn't jumped or reset. It was continuous. No skipped frames, no interruptions. I switched to the stairwell camera that connected to that hallway. Empty. The elevator camera. Still. I opened the building access logs again. No badge entries, no door activity, no alarms. I was suddenly very aware of how quiet the security office was. The hum of the monitors felt louder. The ticking wall clock behind me sounded sharp, almost intrusive. I checked the hallway camera one more time. The shape was back. This time it wasn't moving. It stood at the far end of the hall, partially obscured by the camera's angle. I couldn't make out details. No face, no clothing, just the outline of something upright and still. I held my breath. The shape didn't move. It felt like it was waiting. I reached for the radio to call another guard, then stopped. I didn't want to explain what I was seeing. I didn't even know how to explain it to myself. I watched the monitor, my eyes burning, afraid to blink. Slowly, the shape leaned forward, not toward the camera, but slightly to the side. Then it stepped out of frame, not away from the hallway, toward the camera's blind spot. I checked the time, 2:31 a.m., and for the first time that night, a thought settled heavily in my mind. Whatever was moving through that building wasn't lost. It was learning where the cameras couldn't see. I couldn't stop watching the monitors. Every instinct told me to stand up, to check the building in person, but the idea of walking those empty hallways made my stomach twist. Whatever I was seeing on the cameras felt safer at a distance. That didn't last. The hallway feed flickered again. Not a glitch, not static, just a brief dip in brightness. When it stabilized, the shape was closer, much closer. It stood halfway down the hallway now, no longer at the edge of the frame. Still no details, no features, just the unmistakable outline of something upright. My heart started pounding. I checked the timestamp. 2:36 a.m. I switched to the camera covering the security office hallway, the one that led directly to where I was sitting. Empty. I exhaled slowly, trying to calm myself. Maybe it was a trick of perspective. Maybe the camera was picking up reflections or shadows from outside. Then I heard something. Footsteps. Not from the monitors, from inside the building. They were faint but real. Slow steps echoing somewhere beyond the thin walls of the office. I froze, listening as they moved closer, then stopped. I looked back at the screens. The shape on the hallway camera was gone. I scanned the other feeds frantically. Stairwell, lobby, garage. Nothing. That's when the camera directly outside the security office flickered. The hallway outside my door appeared on screen. Empty. Then, slowly, something leaned into frame. Not fully, just enough to block part of the camera's view. I could see the edge of a shoulder, dark, undefined, filling the corner of the screen. It stayed there, perfectly still, like it knew exactly where the camera could see. My office door handle rattled softly, just once. I stood up so fast my chair fell over behind me. The radio slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a clatter. The handle didn't move again. The camera feed went black. Every screen at once. The office was suddenly silent, the hum of the monitors gone. In the darkness, I heard breathing, right outside the door. Slow, controlled, patient. And then a voice spoke, not loud, not angry, just close enough to hear. "You're watching the wrong screen." I don't remember opening the door. I just remember standing in the hallway a few minutes later, the lights flickering back on as if nothing had happened. The monitors in the security office were working again. Every camera feed showed exactly what it was supposed to show. Empty hallways, locked doors, no movement. I checked the time, 2:44 a.m. My radio crackled as another guard checked in, asking if everything was all right. I told him yes. I don't know why I said that. I spent the rest of the shift glued to the screens, afraid to look away for even a second. Nothing appeared again. No flickers, no shapes, no glitches. When morning came, I filed a report anyway. I described the movement, the camera blackout, the door handle. Later that day, my supervisor reviewed the footage with me. There was nothing. No shadow in the hallway. No shape near the camera. No blackout at all. According to the system logs, every camera had been functioning normally the entire night. The report was dismissed. I quit that job not long after. But here's the part I still can't explain. Sometimes, late at night, I'll glance at my phone camera by accident, the black screen before it activates, and for just a split second, I can see something standing behind me, perfectly still, waiting for me to look at the wrong screen again. Night shifts have a way of messing with your sense of time. The hours blur together when nothing happens, and by the early morning, you stop checking the clock as often. That night, I was working alone, sitting behind a desk in a nearly empty building, waiting for my shift to end. I remember glancing at the clock out of boredom. 3:16 a.m. One more hour to go. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the low hum of the lights and the distant noise of traffic far outside. Everything felt routine, quiet, dull, predictable. Then the phone rang. The sound was sharp in the silence, loud enough to make me jump. Hardly anyone ever called that number at night. If they did, it was usually a wrong number or an automated message. I looked at the phone before answering. No caller ID. I hesitated for a moment, then picked it up. Hello? There was no response. I was about to hang up when I heard breathing. Not static, not interference. Breathing. Slow and steady, like someone holding the phone close to their mouth but not speaking. I shifted in my chair, suddenly aware of how alone I was. "Can I help you?" I asked. The breathing stopped. Then a voice spoke. Calm, quiet, and much too clear. "You're working late tonight." My stomach tightened. "Yes," I said slowly. "Who is this?" There was a short pause before the voice answered. "I was just checking the time." I glanced back at the clock. 3:17 a.m. And something about the way he said it made me feel like he already knew exactly where I was. I stayed silent for a moment after he said that. The line didn't disconnect. There was no static, just quiet. Like the person on the other end was waiting to see how I'd react. "How did you get this number?" I finally asked. Another pause. "I didn't dial randomly," the voice said. "That wouldn't make sense." My grip tightened around the phone. I glanced around the room instinctively, even though there was no one else there. The door was still locked. The hallway outside my office was empty. "You shouldn't be calling here," I said. "This is a work line." "I know," he replied. "You answer it every night around this time." My stomach dropped. I hadn't told him my schedule. I hadn't told him where I worked. Yet he spoke like he'd been paying attention for a while. "I just wanted to hear your voice," he continued calmly, "to make sure you were still awake." I checked the clock again. 3:19 a.m. "I'm hanging up," I said, even though I didn't move to do it. "You can," the voice replied, "but then you won't hear me knock." That's when I felt it, that cold, sinking feeling in my chest that told me this wasn't just a prank. "Knock where?" I asked. "At the door you keep glancing at," he said. My eyes snapped to the office door. I hadn't realized I'd been looking at it. The handle didn't move. There was no sound, but the silence around it felt heavier now, like the space outside was suddenly occupied. "You don't have to open it," the voice went on. "I just like knowing you know I'm here." "I don't see anyone," I said. "That's because you're sitting down," he replied. My heart started racing. I stood up slowly, never taking my eyes off the door. "Tell me who you are," I said. Another pause. Then quietly he said, "You look tired tonight. I almost called earlier." My phone vibrated. Not the work phone, my personal phone. A notification lit up the screen. Unknown number. "Still awake?" The voice on the line spoke again, softer now. "I told you I was checking the time." My eyes stayed locked on the office door as my phone buzzed again in my hand. I didn't answer the message. I didn't need to. The voice on the line already knew. "You're standing up now," he said calmly. "Good." I was getting tired of guessing. My throat felt tight. If this is a prank, it's not funny. He didn't laugh. "This isn't for you," he replied. "It's for me." I backed away from the desk slowly, keeping the door in my line of sight. The hallway outside was dark, but I could feel something there. Not moving, not trying to get in, just present. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. Another pause. "So you'll remember this night," he said. Most people don't notice when things start. My work phone crackled softly, like the line was struggling to stay clear. For a moment I thought the call had dropped, and then I heard breathing again. Not rushed, not excited, close. I reached for the light switch and flipped it on. The hallway flooded with light. It was empty. No one standing there. No shadow moving away. Just the same stretch of floor I'd walked past 100 times before. "You don't like the light," he said. "That's okay." The lights flickered once, then went out. I felt my stomach drop as the office fell into darkness. The glow from my phone was the only light left, and even that felt too weak. That's when I heard the knock. Not loud, not aggressive. 3 slow taps. Right on the office door. I froze, barely breathing. "You can hang up now," the voice said. "You don't need the phone anymore." The handle turned slightly, just enough to make the lock click. My phone vibrated one last time. A new message appeared. Unknown number. "I'm right outside." The knock came again, closer this time, and then the voice whispered, not through the phone, but through the door. I don't remember screaming, but my throat hurt afterward. The next thing I remember clearly is the office lights coming back on and the sound of my phone clattering onto the floor. The door was still closed. The lock was still intact. There was no one outside. Another guard found me sitting against the wall a few minutes later, pale and shaking. He asked what happened. I told him someone had been calling, knocking, standing right outside the door. He checked the hallway. Empty. We checked the call logs on the work phone together. There was one incoming call at 3:17 a.m. No number listed. Duration, 8 minutes. My personal phone, however, showed nothing. No missed calls, no messages, no unknown number. By the time my shift ended, the fear had dulled into something heavy and uncomfortable. The building looked normal again, quiet, safe, too safe. I quit that job 2 days later, but here's the part that still bothers me. Every now and then, when I'm awake late at night, my phone will light up without making a sound. No notification, no vibration, just the screen turning on. And if I check the time right then, it's always 3:17 a.m. The worst part of the night shift wasn't working alone. It was knowing exactly when it would end. I worked nights at a small warehouse on the edge of town. No customers, no coworkers after midnight. Just me, the empty building, and the slow crawl of the clock toward morning. I always checked the time too often during the last hour. That night was no different. 4:41 a.m., 19 minutes left. I started doing what I always did near the end of my shift, turning off unused lights, locking doors, making sure everything was ready for the morning crew. The warehouse felt quieter than usual, like even the building was waiting for something. That's when I noticed the silence. The ventilation system had shut off. It usually stayed on all night. I stopped walking and listened. Nothing. No hum, no distant traffic, no wind outside, just stillness. I checked the control panel. Everything looked normal. No alerts, no warnings. I told myself it was nothing and kept moving, but that uneasy feeling stayed with me, the kind that makes you feel watched without giving you any reason why. I glanced at the clock again. 4:47 a.m., 13 minutes left. That's when I heard footsteps, not echoing through the building, not approaching me, just pacing, somewhere beyond the racks and shadows. Slow, unhurried, like whatever was walking knew exactly how much time was left. I stopped walking and listened more carefully. The footsteps weren't loud. They didn't echo the way they should have in a place that big. It sounded like someone moving slowly between the storage racks, careful not to bump into anything. I told myself it had to be my imagination. Warehouses make noise at night. Metal contracts, air shifts. Sounds travel in weird ways when everything else is quiet. I'd worked there long enough to know that. Still, I didn't move for a few seconds. The footsteps stopped. That made it worse. I checked the time again. 4:48 a.m., 12 minutes left. I forced myself to keep working, moving from one section to another, shutting off lights and locking doors. Each click of a switch felt louder than it should have, like I was announcing where I was. Every time I moved, the footsteps started again. Always at a distance, always slow, never getting closer, but never going away. I tried to track the sound, turning my head as I walked, but it never came from the same direction twice. Sometimes it sounded like it was behind me, other times, off to my left or right, just beyond the tall shelves stacked with boxes. I didn't call out. Something about the way the footsteps followed my movements told me that wouldn't be a good idea. At one point, I stopped completely. The footsteps stopped too. I stood there, my breath shallow, waiting for them to start again. They didn't. The silence pressed in, heavy and uncomfortable, like the building itself was holding its breath. Then I heard a different sound, a slow exhale, not close enough to feel, but close enough to hear. I turned quickly, shining my flashlight down the aisle between the racks. Empty. I backed away, my heart pounding now, and checked the clock again. 4:53 a.m. 7 minutes left. I headed toward the front office, telling myself I'd stay there until the shift ended. It felt safer to be near the exit, near the cameras, near the light. As I walked, I realized something that made my stomach drop. The footsteps weren't following me anymore. They were ahead of me. I could hear them pacing near the front, slow, deliberate steps, moving back and forth like someone waiting for a door to open, waiting for me. I stopped short, standing there in the half-dark, listening as the footsteps continued near the exit. Whoever it was didn't sound nervous, didn't sound rushed. It sounded patient, like it knew exactly when my shift ended. I stood there, frozen, listening to the footsteps near the front office. They moved slowly back and forth, stopping every few seconds, then starting again. Whoever, or whatever, was there didn't sound impatient. It sounded like it was killing time. I checked the clock on my phone. 4:56 a.m. 4 minutes left. I considered calling the police, but the thought of explaining footsteps that didn't belong to anyone made my stomach turn. What would I even say? That something was waiting for me to clock out? The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I took a careful step forward. Nothing happened. Another step. Then I heard it again. Closer now. Not walking this time. Breathing. Slow, controlled, coming from just beyond the office door. I could hear it through the thin wall, steady and deliberate. Like whoever was there wasn't nervous at all. My hand hovered over the light switch. I didn't flip it. I checked the time again. 4:58 a.m. 2 minutes. That's when the footsteps resumed. Not pacing anymore, but moving away from the office, deeper into the warehouse. I didn't understand why until I realized something that made my chest tighten. They weren't leaving. They were giving me space, like they expected me to follow. I stayed where I was, barely breathing, eyes locked on the office door. The warehouse felt impossibly large now, every shadow stretched thin by the low lighting. Then, without warning, every overhead light shut off at once. The warehouse dropped into darkness. I gasped, fumbling for my flashlight as my phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't need to look at it to know the time. 5 a.m. My shift was over. The lights flickered back on, and for the first time all night, the footsteps started moving quickly. Not running, approaching, from multiple directions at once. I didn't wait to see what was coming. I grabbed my keys, burst through the office door, and ran straight out the exit without looking back. I didn't stop until I was locked inside my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely start the engine. As I pulled away, I glanced back at the warehouse. The lights were off again, but something was standing just inside the glass doors, watching me leave. I didn't go back to that warehouse for my next shift. I called in sick that morning, my voice shaking as I tried to explain. They didn't question it. They just marked me absent and told me to rest. Later that day, a supervisor called and asked why I'd left the building without clocking out properly. I told him I'd stayed until 5 a.m., just like I always did. He paused. According to the system, my badge had been scanned out at 4:59 a.m., 1 minute early. I asked him if anyone else had been inside the warehouse that night. He said no. The cameras hadn't picked up any movement after midnight. No alarms. No doors opening. Nothing unusual. I quit the job a few days later. They didn't try to stop me. Sometimes, when I'm awake late at night, I think about that building, about how quiet it felt in those last few minutes, about how whatever was there never rushed me, never chased me. It just waited, like it knew the rules, like it knew it couldn't follow me until my shift ended. And the part that still keeps me up at night is this. If I had stayed 1 minute longer, if I hadn't left exactly when I did, I don't think it would have let me walk out alone.